productions going on where we have people flying in, academics and stuff, to talk about Aleister Crowley and kind of some of the mysteries around Boleskine House. So it's quite fun. So watch your heads here. A little bit about kind of the recent history. I'm Keith. I'm the chairman for the Boleskine House Foundation. The house came on the market in 2019 after it was devastated by fire twice, in 2015 and then also in 2019. Someone broke in and set the rest of it on fire 5 days after we completed on the purchase. So I guess the purchase of the place triggered someone very unhappy. I don't know if they were a crazy religious person or a crazy occultist. I guess both extremes kind of line up in the same place. But we decided to register a charity and put it into the ownership of a charity, and that's what the Boleskine House Foundation seeks to do, is essentially restore and preserve Boleskine House. And we've since kind of increased a couple of the other objectives that we have, which is education, holding recreational activities. And just before you came here, I was just finishing up an application to the regulator, because we want to help facilitate biodiversity and preserve the natural environment and create like a sustainable kind of thing for the estate. So we have some ambitious plans to establish a wildflower meadow this spring. So we're going to start digging on the land and sowing wildflower seeds. And then creating paths for people to enjoy and so on and so forth. So that's kind of some of the recent history. I guess the history of Boleskine House, it's hard to say where it started. Mostly 18th century, I believe. We do think that there's a smaller footprint in the building that is much older, possibly 16th or 17th century. Whether it was an old inn or whether it was an old church, we're still trying to kind of figure that out. But we do know that it was established as a residence as early as the late 18th century and finished in 1809 by Archibald Campbell Fraser, who was a British diplomat and a MP for this area of the Highlands in Inverness-shire right after Culloden. So that was a very difficult time to be a Scottish MP back then, and he was trying to reverse a lot of the laws that the British had imposed on the Scottish after Culloden, such as the banning of Scottish dress and the banning of the use of the Gaelic language. He was a big defender of those things, and actually got a lot of those things reversed while he was holding his seat. Now, someone more popular in history is his father, Simon Fraser, 11th Lord Lovat, also nicknamed the Fox, because he was famously known in history for playing both sides during the rebellion years. When he was here in Scotland, he was a Hanoverian, but when he was in France, he was conspiring, and he was a Jacobite. So he kept playing kind of both sides whenever it suited him, and he was famously and noticeably absent from the Battle of Culloden, where all of his Fraser men were being slaughtered within the hour that it took to for the battle to complete. He was caught later on, after he met up with the Bonnie Prince just on the other side of this hill in Gorthleck, at the famous Gorthleck House, which is non-existent anymore. But after they split, Bonnie Prince Charlie went back to France and escaped, but Fraser was caught and brought down to London at the Tower and beheaded for treason. And one of the interesting tales of that is that it's said that he his execution, which was public back then, crowded the platform with viewers so much that it collapsed and killed several people, which sent him into a laughing frenzy right before getting his head chopped off, hence laughing your head off comes the expression. So it was his son, his second son by his second wife, Archibald Fraser, who established this as a residence and finished it around 1809. You'll notice that the courtyard is of kind of a sort of Georgian Roman villa, traditional, kind of Georgian vernacular, where you can't see it because of the scaffold, but you'll notice there's some of these kind of grand Palladian columns made out of sandstone with some of these grandiose windows proportioned in a very Georgian and symmetrical style out of sandstone as well. I believe the sandstone elements are the more recent additions. When I say recent, I'm talking about 18th century, whereas the original building was mostly all granite, and I'll come back to that when we walk around in a little while. So, other famous owners, of course, you can follow me this way and start walking. Other famous owners are, of course, most people know Aleister Crowley was the former owner of the house. He bought it in 1899 with the intention of setting up shop to do magic rituals in the house. Most famously what's known as the Abramelin ritual, which I'll get to that when we get around the side. I just kind of wanted to bring you here for a moment so you can kind of see some of the elements that we've been doing in the last year. Obviously we've gotten a brand new roof structure on. The dormer windows are huge. I didn't expect them to be that big, but it's a pretty massive roof. And then this sandstone facade here is quite impressive because that was completely gutted by the fire. So that is all brand new sandstone, cut and dressed to make it look old. So all of those little notches that you see are all individual hand chisel marks to make it look like it would have done back in the 18th century. So I'll take you this way. And do watch where you step. There's a lot of fallen branches we've not been able to pick up after the storms recently. You can get a nice vista point of Loch Ness here. And this is essentially, in the next couple weeks, we're going to be bringing diggers in here and digging all of this, the top layer, and then sowing wildflower seeds here. So this will be a sea of color by later this year. So we'll go around the front this way to the house. We're probably going to put it in as like a little decorative garden ornament in the future. You can see just kind of the amount of stone coming out of the building and how large it is, and just, I mean, no one can move that with one person. I've tried rolling it and it's impossible. So just to think of how they got that stuff in there back in the day with horses and chain blocks and whatnot. But if you come here and you just kind of look in this window, this is really interesting because you can kind of see the corridor as it goes down all the way to the other end of the house, and just how grand it kind of is inside. And I'll bring you in for a little peek. So again, these are the sandstone elements that Archibald would have put in. This is obviously the older one, and these are newer ones that we've kind of... Those aren't reinstated. We actually got listed building consent to open them up as new windows, because they were already openings, but they weren't in keeping with the building. So we got permission to open them up in a sort of in the proportion that the older ones are. And this is south facing, so we can flood light in the afternoon into these rooms. So what is the end purpose of what we're going to use the building for? Everybody asks. We're still kind of trying to figure that out, but my personal vision and the vision of the trustees at this time is to create a sort of community and cultural center that kind of focuses on everything from education, hospitality, recreation, music, the arts, I mean, you name it, anything that's going to really facilitate happiness and well-being and enjoyment, really. Again, you have the sandstone here, but then what we're looking at right here is an older building. So you can see all of a sudden now these windows turn into granite private windows. So this is where the original house would have stopped when they built on from here and extended over many decades, centuries, whatever. So it's my belief from the archaeological kind of research we've done so far is that our main structure was these two bayed windows in the central room here. So it was originally, that was the original footprint. And then it was gradually built on over time. And you can even see, and I'll show you when we go inside, there's bits of that corridor wall on the inner part where there's old Harley, which meant that was an external wall. So that corridor would have been extended probably by Archibald Fraser in the late 18th century. Now, what was it before? There's some records saying that there was an inn next to the old Boleskine church, and we know that the Boleskine church was likely in the burial ground just across the road here. And there's an old wall that might have been like the outer skin of the church. We also know there's some historical records that talk about how the structure kept falling into disrepair over and over and over. It wasn't being taken care of or maintained properly, and the church was eventually moved over further south of Foyers and Drum Temple, where it is today, in the late 18th century. But there was a lot of trouble during the 18th century in this part of Loch Ness. It wasn't as built up as you have over there on the A road. This was just kind of a small track road where the rebels and the locals were, essentially using it as through roads and, rallying the clans to come to their cause. So there's a lot less sunlight on this side. There was a lot more forest. So it could have been, this structure could have possibly been used as either a Jacobite, meeting place, or possibly even commandeered by the military during the construction of General Wade's Road, which would have been in like 1730 or so, or in the 1730s. So, if you follow me over here, this is one of the most interesting parts of the house that we get to, which is Aleister Crowley. Now, what was Crowley doing here? The news and popular media and YouTubers will tell you he was doing, evil, dark, black magic. But people who have read a good deal about Crowley, his biography, and even some of his work will know that he wasn't a Satanist. Modern Satanism came far long after Crowley. Crowley was entrenched in a very interesting period during the esoteric traditions, I would call it esoteric or mystical traditions, of the late 19th century. And it was kind of a period where the trend was being a part of these Illuminist societies that kind of stemmed off of Freemasonry. So one of these that Crowley was a part of was called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. which kind of stems off of these, quasi-Masonic and Rosicrucian societies that were intending to teach these arcane secrets of wisdom to its initiates from Egypt and from Christian mystical grimoires and so on and so forth, and the whole Western magical tradition. And one of the manuscripts that Crowley came across while he was part of this order was called the Book of Abramelin the Mage, which is purportedly written in the late 1400s by a learned Jewish Kabbalist who learned these secrets from an Egyptian mage and passed them on to his son. Now we know that it was likely not written in the late 1400s, but is probably a much later date. But the book is an instruction on how to essentially go through all these different stages of rituals and incantations and prayer to come to knowledge and conversation of one's holy guardian angel. Crowley was fascinated by this manuscript because it was very detailed, but it was supposed to take 6 months to do. So you're talking about 6 months every day. You get up at 4 a.m., you eat a piece of bread and fast for the rest of the day. You put on garments and light candles and start praying until you can't pray anymore for 6 months long. So this is something that obviously even the most austere religious person couldn't even engage in these days. But you were supposed to be in a remote location and not be bothered and do this day in and day out. And it was full of epistolatory kind of language where you were calling upon these echelons of angels and spirits to do your bidding, so you could go up to these higher levels and speak with the holy guardian angel at the very end. It was the culminating mystical experience that you were supposed to achieve. So Crowley purportedly was scouring the UK up and down. He went to the Lake District and went to all these other areas to find the perfect place to do this. And he set his eyes on Boleskine while he was sailing down Loch Ness one day and said, I have to have this. And he offered the owner at the time, Rosemary Burton, twice its market value and purchased it from her. She was reluctant to sell it to her, but when he gave her twice the money, she sold it. Now, one of the parameters in this Abramelin ceremony is to have a door or an opening that faces exactly north. And the reason for this is because you are supposed to have this opening that leads out into a terrace so that all the spirits that you've brought in can congregate in this one spot, and it's supposed to be in the north for whatever reason. So this door, you can see how it used to be a window. We've taken all the render off the building, and you can see the infill where it used to be a window. But he put in this door, and then made that room his ceremonial room. Now this is modern. It would have been just sand out here, so that you could tell if he was successful. You could see the footprints of the spirits walking around. I haven't heard of any records of anybody else that witnessed this, but that's the story anyway. Now one of the legends is that he dropped the ritual. He didn't close the circles, and then it wreaked havoc on all of Stratheric and Loch Ness. The Loch Ness monster came out of the loch at that point because he didn't properly close the ceremony. What really happened was he was in London. He was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in London, and the members there didn't really like him very much. They were kind of, sort of high and mighty, stuffy Londoners down there, and they didn't really like Crowley's libertine viewpoints and the way he kind of carried himself. But the administrator, or the head of the Golden Dawn, who was also on the people in London's bad side, because he was in Paris telling them what to do. They were just on the verge of mutiny already, and then what happened was when they stonewalled Crowley from going on to the higher levels of initiation, MacGregor Mathers in Paris said, well, come to Paris, I'll give you the initiation. So he dropped the ritual, went to Paris, never completed it at Boleskine, and then all the people in London said, that's it, we're done, and then that pretty much destroyed the original conception of the Golden Dawn. Then it all schismed from then on out. So he got tired of all these occult societies and went traveling the world after that. He eventually came back to Boleskine, but never picked up the ceremony again, and then went on to do other things. Once World War I started in 1914, he sold Boleskine. He was getting kind of tight for cash, and went to America for many years after that, because he was worried about an oncoming Holocaust from the Great War. So it was around 1914 that it was not in his ownership any longer. And then it passed through a series of hands all through the 20th century. Of course, the other famous owner that we know is Jimmy Page, who bought it because he was interested in Aleister Crowley. All of those rock musicians back in the 70s were interested in these alternative thinkers. So Page had it from 1970 until the 1990s, and then it went into the ownership of Ronald and Annette McGilvray, who were the clan heads of Clan McGilvray. Sharing ownership with Fraser, they wanted to make this a Fraser thing again, and they were not very happy when people wanted to bring up Aleister Crowley. But when we walk around, we'll see an old cairn that they erected in honor of the McGilvray clan, and they would have all these festive things out on the lawn here with bagpipes and traditional Scottish festivities throughout the 1990s. It was a fun time for them. Before we go around, actually I'll wait until we go in the house, and then you'll get a closer look at some of the interesting parts of the house and how it's built. So we used to have it blocked up and I couldn't bring people in, but now I can kind of show you everything. McGilvray cairn here, put in 1997. There's apparently, legend has it, there's a time capsule in there. So we'll wait to open that for another 20 years or so. But this is where they would have had their festivities, and a nice view of the loch and so on and so forth. The deck has a lot of work to be done before it's safe.